When Richard Allen's face turned pale as the hidden recordings echoed across the boardroom, I knew the moment had finally come. Catherine's voice cracked in denial. Elise slammed her fist on the table. Thomas whispered curses under his breath. They never imagined that Mila Allen, the orphan they once paraded as their charity project, would be the one to bring their empire to its knees. I am Mila Allen, 30 years old, a financial advisor. People called me fortunate, the girl lifted out of an orphanage, placed beneath crystal chandeliers. For a long time I believed it. I believed gratitude could silence the unease in me. But then the mask slipped, and gratitude hardened into resolve. America loves miracle stories. The Allen family gave them one. Perfect photographs, Richard's sharp smile, Catherine's pearls. The siblings posed like royalty. And me, half a step behind, smiling just enough. Inside, I knew I was only decoration, a symbol of their supposed kindness, a pawn in their performance. Their world glittered, townhouses with marble floors, towers with glass doors that opened at their names, parties with wine like prayers, laughter that shifted when deals were sealed. I learned to listen to those shifts. I learned to smile while memorizing everything. Richard taught me risk. He said the market does not reward hesitation. Catherine taught me presentation, charity as performance. Thomas wore arrogance like a crown. Elise scattered contempt like perfume. I learned other things too. The way signatures hide bruises, the way documents glide to cover shadows, the way foundations root favors like veins beneath skin. At a gala, a banker thanked Richard for an assurance. My name was inside that clause. I felt the room tilt. Later, I opened the file, a guarantor note with my name wrapped inside, cold even through a screen. I asked Catherine. She said it was standard. Family supports family. She touched my wrist with a hand that smiled without warmth. Richard called me into his office. He said, "Your expertise makes you an asset." He used asset the way hunters use trail. Thomas laughed. "Do not be dramatic," he said. "You would be nowhere without us." Elise smiled thin and sharp. "Do not make trouble." The air itself cooled around her. I nodded, said almost nothing. But inside, resolve gathered. If they saw me as a tool, I would become a tool they could not hold. If they measured me in contracts, I would move the decimal they could not find. I kept working, taking notes in empty margins, filing details that appeared forgettable but were not, visiting the orphanage steps, whispering to the girl I once was, "Stay awake." One evening, I asked Richard, "What if the market turned against you?" He did not look at me. "Markets do not turn against men who know how to hold the wheel," he said. Then he patted my shoulder like furniture. Catherine warned me about envy. "Be careful with your friends," she said. Her smile trembled with calculation. Thomas leaned across my desk. "You are good," he said. "Which is why you are useful." Elise asked about my weekend, then reminded me which doors opened to the right bloodline. Her subtext clear. I had been given a key, and I should not ask where it led. I stored their words, their tones, their smiles that cut. Winter came. New York towers breathing frost. I walked home with my collar up and my plan forming. Not a blaze. A blueprint. Not revenge as spectacle. Revenge as structure. I needed proof. I needed patience. I needed silence until silence was the loudest sound in the room. I began collecting the small things. A transfer date too perfect. A charity fund spending less than claimed. Losses that aligned with tax seasons. Alone, they were nothing. Together, they began to hum. Richard said, "Family is strategy." I said, "Family is not a spreadsheet." Catherine said, "Trust me." I said, "I did. That is why I read everything." Thomas said, "Do not test me." I said, "I only test the numbers." Elise said, "You will never belong." I said, "I already do, just not where you think." Waiting became my weapon. I saved what needed saving, memorized what could not be saved. I watched the city blur into rivers of headlights, whispered to the girl I had been, "Hold steady. The day will come." I did not yet know the sound of my recordings filling the boardroom. I did not yet know Richard's face drained of color, Catherine's denial breaking, Elise's fists pounding, Thomas cursing under his breath. But I knew this. When a family builds an empire from appearances, the first crack never comes from the outside. It comes from the corner where they left a quiet girl to decorate their story. It comes from the place they thought no one would look. I am that place. I am the quiet they forgot to fear. And this is where my story begins. The chandelier glowed like a captured sun. Crystal glasses rang, laughter curled through the hall, and the Allen family stood at the center of it all. I sat at the far end of the table, not quite hidden, not quite included, always the extra seat, always the quiet one meant to make the picture complete. Richard lifted his glass, his voice booming. "To Allen Group. Another quarter of growth, another victory in the market." People clapped, cameras clicked. He loved the sound of approval more than the taste of wine. His smile had the sharpness of glass. Beside him, Catherine rested her hand on his arm, the perfect wife. Her voice flowed like honey. And none of this would be possible without the values of family. We believe in giving back. We believe in shaping futures. Her eyes slid to me for half a second. The guests followed her gaze. Smiles nodded around the table. The rescued orphan. Their charity turned success story. My cheeks burned, but I kept my smile in place. I whispered inside myself, "They do not see me. They see their own reflection in me." Elise leaned across, her diamonds catching the light. "Mila," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut, "you should smile more. It makes you look less nervous." Her laughter spilled across the table, joined by two women at her side. Their bracelets clinked like applause. I forced a small smile. That was what Elise wanted, to remind me of my place, even with strangers watching. Thomas tapped his glass with a fork, impatient, his tie already loosened. He looked at me with a grin that was more command than charm. "Mila, be a dear and fetch the investment sheets from my briefcase. They're in the study." He said it as though I were his assistant, as though I wasn't at the same table. My chest tightened. I stood, excused myself softly, and walked through the polished hallway lined with family portraits that never featured me. In the study, the air was still, heavy with leather and dust. I opened his briefcase, fingers brushing papers, contracts, ledgers. One folder slipped out, a corner bent, my name typed in bold across the header. I froze. Guarantor agreement. Beneficiary, Allen Group. Responsible party, Mila Allen. The words swam before my eyes. My signature sat at the bottom. I had never signed it. I had never even seen it. My throat dried. My heartbeat turned into a clock ticking too fast. I whispered out loud, though no one could hear me. "What did you do, Richard?" Footsteps echoed in the hall. Catherine's voice floated closer, warm for the guests, sharper when she thought no one else was listening. "Yes, of course, Richard will be speaking at the charity gala next week. We're always eager to support the community." Her laugh trailed past the doorway, as smooth as silk. I slid the folder back, closed the case, and wiped my hands on my dress as if I could erase the touch of ink. Back at the table, Richard was still speaking. He told the guests about expansion, about dominance, about the empire he had built. His chest swelled with pride. His words swelled with certainty. Catherine smiled at every pause. Elise sipped her wine with a smirk. Thomas leaned back, legs spread, smugness dripping from every gesture. And me, I sat quietly, the folder still burning in my memory. I watched them laugh, boasting of power. I saw their masks, perfectly painted, flawless to strangers, rotten beneath. My hand trembled under the table. I clenched it tight until my nails dug into my palm. That night, I could not eat. I could not sleep. The contract pulsed behind my eyelids. My name, their guarantee, their safety net. The truth was no longer just suspicion. It was written, stamped, notarized. I was not their daughter. I was their shield. I sat by the window, city lights spilling across the floor. My reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, pale, quiet, watching. I whispered to the girl in the glass, "You are not their decoration. You are not their shield. You will make them see you." Somewhere in the distance, I heard faint laughter drifting from their rooms, carefree, secure, confident. I closed my eyes and let the sound burn into me. One day, I promised, that laughter would choke in their throats. One day, they would taste fear the way they once fed me silence. And as the night deepened, the first seed of suspicion hardened into something sharper. Not just suspicion, not just anger, a vow. The house was quiet that night, too quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, as though the walls are listening. Richard had gone to a late meeting. Catherine was asleep upstairs, or at least pretending to be. Elise was out, dressed in sequins and perfume. Thomas was probably at some bar, gambling with people who laughed too loudly. I moved through the hallway in shadows, my shoes silent on the thick carpet. My pulse thudded like a metronome. I had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in my head. Tonight, I would stop imagining. Tonight, I would see. Richard's office door creaked when I pushed it open. The room smelled of leather and cologne, of power that had been bottled and left to ferment. His desk gleamed under a single lamp, every item placed with surgical precision. And there it was, the safe. Small, discreet, built into the wall behind framed certificates that praised his achievements. I had watched him open it before. He was careless with habits. I knew the sequence of movements, the rhythm of his fingers, the way his shoulders tilted when he turned the final dial. I knelt, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. One click, another, and then the sound of release. The door swung open. Inside, files, stacks of them, neat folders bound with red strings, contracts, deeds, agreements, the bones of the empire he loved to boast about. I pulled one out at random, then another. My hands shook so badly I could hardly focus. Then I saw it. Adoption agreement. Strategic benefit. My name stamped across the page. My birthday. My orphanage. And beneath it, words that hollowed me out. Purpose. To provide legal beneficiary status and facilitate financial instruments beneficial to Allen Group. A child. That was me. Not for love, not for family, for financial instruments, for convenience, for cover. My knees weakened. I sank to the floor with the folder in my lap. The paper felt heavier than iron. My vision blurred, tears stinging, but I kept reading. Clause after clause, my existence defined in terms of utility. Not daughter, not family, asset. I pressed a hand to my mouth to silence the sob that tried to escape. My chest shook with it anyway. For years, I had told myself maybe I mattered. Maybe, in some small corner of their hearts, I was more than an ornament for their photographs, more than a tool. But the truth was here, black ink on white paper, notarized and sealed. I whispered into the empty room, my voice breaking. All this time, you never wanted me. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wanted to rip the folder apart, shred it into confetti and scatter it across the floor. But I couldn't. Proof was power. I needed this. I wiped my face with shaking hands. The tears dried into a tightness around my eyes. My reflection in the glass cabinet looked strange. Eyes swollen, mouth trembling, a girl broken. But then, something shifted. The tremble stilled. The tears stopped falling, and in that reflection, my eyes no longer looked like the child they had caged. They looked sharper, colder. I whispered again, This time the words carried steel. "You think I am your shield, but I will be your storm." I placed the folder back into the safe exactly as I found it, every page in its place, every corner aligned. I closed the door, spun the dial, hung the certificates back where they belonged. When I stepped out into the hallway, the silence felt different. It no longer pressed me down. It stretched before me like a path. I climbed the stairs slowly. From Catherine's room came the faint sound of her voice on the phone, soft, coaxing, like silk sliding over a knife. I paused outside her door, listening. "Yes, Mila is useful," she whispered. "Richard has everything under control. She won't suspect. She's too grateful." My hand clenched at my side. My jaw ached from the force of my teeth pressing together. Too grateful. I walked away before rage could break through the surface. My footsteps were steady, quiet, deliberate. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not cry anymore. I stared at the city lights through the window. Their glow shimmered like fire on water. Inside me, something burned hotter. I thought of every smile Richard had crafted for cameras, every speech Catherine had made about family, every insult Elise had laced with laughter, every command Thomas had thrown at me like crumbs. All of them had believed the lie they told themselves, that I would always be silent, that I would always accept my place. I whispered into the night, my voice steady now. "You made me your cover, your shield, your pawn. You thought you owned me, but you created your own enemy." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. Sleep did not come. It was not welcome anymore. Only resolve curled beside me in the dark. By morning, I was someone else. The girl who had longed for their love was gone. What remained was a woman who carried proof, a woman who carried fury, a woman who carried the promise of retribution. And deep inside, a vow whispered itself again and again. "I will make you fall." The night after I opened Richard's safe, I could not sit still. My mind spun like a machine, relentless, precise. Every word I had read, every clause in that contract carved itself into me. I was not their daughter. I was their strategy. And if they had written me into their plans, then I would rewrite the plan entirely. I stood by the window, city lights pulsing below, and whispered into the dark. "They think I am their shield, but I will be their storm." For the first time, the idea of revenge no longer frightened me. It steadied me. It gave shape to the chaos inside. I sketched it in my mind. 3 steps, simple in words, brutal in execution. First, the money. Always the money. Allen Group was an empire built on foundations they claimed were solid. I knew otherwise. I would follow the threads in their books, find the missing millions, the phantom accounts, the tax shelters that bled the system dry. I would gather proof, contracts, transfers, whispers from bankers too nervous to speak but too afraid to lie. Second, the mind. Families like the Allens rot from within when trust is fractured. Elise's jealousy of Thomas's arrogance toward Elise, Catherine's subtle manipulations, Richard's cold favoritism, cracks already ran through them. I only needed to widen those cracks, feed the doubts, plant small lies that sounded like truth, watch them turn claws on each other while smiling for cameras. And last, the fire. Public, legal, inescapable. I would drag their secrets into the light. Courtrooms, reporters, headlines. The family that had used me as their mask of virtue would collapse under the weight of their own hypocrisy. I breathed out slowly. 3 steps. 3 blows, enough to bring an empire to its knees. But I could not do it alone. The first name came to me like an old scar. Daniel Cooper, a lawyer once inside Richard's circle, discarded when he refused to sign off on fraudulent filings. He had lost everything because of Allen Group. I remembered seeing his face on the news years ago, humiliation etched into his features as Richard spoke of professional incompetence. I found him in a modest office downtown, papers stacked in tired piles, the glow of failure still clinging to the walls. When he looked up and saw me, suspicion flashed in his eyes. "What do you want, Miss Allen?" he asked, his voice rough. I smiled faintly. "Not Allen. Just Mila. And I want what you want. Justice." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Justice doesn't pay rent." "Revenge might," I whispered. I slid a folder across his desk, copies of contracts, a photo of the adoption agreement. His hands froze on the paper. His eyes widened. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I knew Richard was a snake," he muttered. "But this could bury him." Next came Rachel Morris, a journalist with a reputation for chasing stories that cut too close to the bone. She had written about political scandals, corporate frauds, men who had fallen from grace because of her words. Her name was whispered in boardrooms like a warning. We met in a coffee shop, far from the Allen neighborhoods. She studied me carefully, her recorder untouched on the table. "You realize," she said, stirring her drink, "going after them means going after the untouchable. They'll crush you." I looked her straight in the eye. They already tried, but they forgot one thing. "And what's that?" "They built me to be useful. Now I'll be lethal." Her lips curved into something between a grin and a dare. "Then let's make them bleed." Walking back that night, the city felt different. The streets were the same, the air cold, the neon buzzing above empty sidewalks. But inside me, a new current ran strong. I returned to my apartment, sat at my desk, and opened a blank page. At the top, I wrote one sentence. "They think I am a tool. I will become the knife that cuts their bloodline." Hot. I stared at the words. They did not scare me. They comforted me. I began listing names, banks, subsidiaries, shell companies. Every meeting I remembered, every smile that masked a threat, every slip of information overheard at a party. My memory became my weapon. My profession became my sword. Hours passed. The city went quiet. Dawn crept across my window, but I did not rest. Not now. My pulse was steady, my breath calm, my eyes colder than the night before. The girl they had paraded for cameras was gone. What remained was something sharper, a strategist, a hunter, a storm they would never see until it broke them apart. The first strike had to be quiet, not a scream, not a blade, just a whisper. I knew Elisa's pride was her weak spot. She lived for appearances. She believed she was sharper than her brother, more sophisticated, more deserving of their father's attention. So I slipped a seed into the soil of her vanity. At a luncheon, surrounded by her friends, I leaned just close enough. "Strange, isn't it, how Thomas has been entertaining bankers alone lately? He must be very confident." I let the words trail, as if they weren't important, as if they were just gossip. Her laugh was forced, her eyes narrowed, and I knew the seed had taken root. It bloomed at the next family dinner. The chandelier blazed, silverware clinked. Richard held court as always, booming about expansion in Miami. Elise swirled her wine, gaze fixed on her brother. "Funny," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That new car of yours, Thomas. Quite the purchase. I imagine it came from more than your allowance, didn't it?" The table stilled. Catherine's smile faltered. Richard looked up, sharp. Thomas's grin slipped into a snarl. "What the hell are you implying?" She sipped, calm and cruel. "Oh, nothing. Just that some people seem to be dipping their hands a little too deep into company accounts." His hand slammed the table. "Say it. Say I stole." Her laugh rang, brittle as glass. "You said it yourself." The argument tore through the dinner like a storm. Catherine tried to hush them. "Children, please, not in front of everyone." But her voice was paper against thunder. Richard barked for order. Servants froze in doorways. I cut my steak into neat squares, silent, my face impassive. But inside, my pulse beat with satisfaction. They were cracking, right on schedule. A few nights later, Catherine summoned me for tea. Her private lounge smelled of roses and money, everything carefully arranged to look maternal, generous. She poured tea herself, not letting the staff touch it. That was her game, a performance of intimacy. "My dear," she began, her tone gentle, "I know your siblings can be difficult. They lash out because they're insecure. You are different." Her hand slid across the table, covering mine. "You are special to me, Mila." "You've always been special. Don't let their quarrels trouble you. You belong with me." Her eyes glistened as if with sincerity, but her grip was tight, controlling. I recognized the trap. She wanted me loyal. She wanted me pliable. I tilted my head, let my eyes soften, and gave her what she thought she wanted. Then I smiled. Not warm, not grateful. A smile sharp enough to cut silk. She flinched almost imperceptibly. Her fingers loosened. For the first time, I saw unease crack her mask. "Of course, Catherine," I whispered. "I understand." And I did. I understood her fear. Thomas, meanwhile, was unraveling. At the office, he cornered me, his tie askew, his voice hard. "I don't like surprises, Mila. People are talking. About money, about me. You wouldn't know anything about that. Would you?" I met his glare with calm. "I only work with the numbers you give me. If people talk, maybe they see something you don't." His face flushed. "Careful." "Always," I said softly. Later, I learned he had hired a private investigator. I saw the man once, trailing too close, pretending to read a newspaper. I almost laughed. He thought I was blind, so I gave him what he wanted. I left my curtains open one evening. On the desk, deliberately angled, a folder thick with papers. Inside, fabricated contracts, forged signatures, fake emails suggesting Thomas had manipulated accounts, enough to look damning in a blurry photograph. I poured myself a glass of wine, carried it past the window, paused just long enough. I let the investigator take his picture. Then I drew the curtains. 2 days later, the house shook with shouts. I heard Thomas's voice through Richard's office door, furious, desperate. "She's setting me up! She's framing me! Look at these!" Papers slapped against wood. Richard's bark followed. "You fool! Do you think anyone would believe this without proof?" Elise's laughter floated down the hall. "See? He admits it. He's guilty." Catherine's voice quivered. "Please, all of you, stop this. We can't let outsiders see us like this." I stood just outside, silent, listening. Their empire, once polished and untouchable, now cracked like cheap porcelain. At dinner that night, the silence was heavy. Elise glared daggers at Thomas. Thomas muttered curses into his glass. Catherine's smile trembled at the edges, her hand shaking as she lifted her fork. Richard's eyes flicked to me, sharp, suspicious. I held his gaze, and I smiled. The silence after was louder than any argument. They were unraveling, brother against sister, mother against son, father against them all. And I was only beginning. Richard Allen always believed the world bent when he raised his hand. I had spent years watching people bow their heads, watching doors open before he touched them. But power makes men careless. Pride makes them blind. He discovered my meetings. Just coffee in a quiet corner of the city with one of his former allies, a man he had crushed years ago and left in ruin. To Richard, the sight of me across from that man was treason. By dawn, whispers hissed through the corridors of Allen Group that I was unstable, that I was reckless, that perhaps I had never been as competent as they claimed. All planted by Richard, his fingerprints invisible but unmistakable. That afternoon, I was summoned. The elevator doors opened into his office, high above the city. Floor-to-ceiling glass stretched behind him, the skyline his throne. He didn't rise when I entered. He didn't smile. His silence was its own performance. Finally, he spoke. His voice was ice. "You forget who gave you everything." I stayed still. He leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. Without me, you are nothing. A girl plucked from nowhere, a stray. I made you, and I can unmake you just as easily. His words might have once cut me. They didn't anymore. I let the moment hang, then answered softly. Are you sure, Richard? Are you certain you made me? His eyes narrowed. He shoved a folder toward me. The pages inside gleamed with his trap. Sign this. A declaration. You'll admit your overstep. You'll sever ties with Allen Group publicly. If you're obedient, you might salvage your career. He slid a pen across the desk. The metal clicked against the wood. I looked down, feigning hesitation. My hand trembled just enough for him to believe it. Inside, I was steady as stone, because I had been waiting. Weeks earlier, I had planted documents among his files, carefully altered contracts, a transfer that pointed directly to him. It only needed his arrogance, his impatience, his certainty that I would obey. He tapped the desk. Hurry up! My time is worth more than your doubts. I lowered my eyes, picked up the pen. I let him think I had surrendered. And then, with the calmest motion of my life, I signed exactly where he told me. He snatched the folder back, his mouth curling into triumph. He didn't check the lines. He didn't see his name tied to fraudulent transfers, illegal authorizations, his own signature, his own undoing. When I left his office, my chest burned. My steps were slow, deliberate. Inside me, thunder roared. He had signed his death sentence and thought it victory. That night, the phone rang. His number flashed on the screen. I answered. His voice slithered through the line. If you touch Allen Group again, Mila, you'll vanish. Do you understand? People like you don't survive wars like this. I closed my eyes, listening. The silence between us stretched, heavy. Then I spoke, calm, deliberate. I don't need to touch Allen Group. You're already digging your own grave. There was a sharp inhale, his rage crackling across the line. Ungrateful child! I cut him off, my voice colder than his. No, Richard. Not child. Not yours. Never yours. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound but his breathing, ragged, furious. Then the line went dead. I stood at the window, the city glowing below. My reflection stared back, eyes dark, jaw set, no longer the girl who once craved his approval. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release, from the weight sliding off my shoulders. He thought I was cornered. He thought he still controlled me, but tonight he had given me what I needed, proof of his crimes in his own handwriting. I whispered to myself, words steady as stone. He thinks he can erase me, but every step he takes now only buries him deeper. I thought of Catherine whispering her poison, desperate to bind me. I thought of Elise and Thomas tearing at each other like wolves, and I thought of Richard believing he could still command the storm. But the storm was mine, and it was rising. I turned away from the window. Sleep did not come. I didn't want it. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote the vow that pulsed in my blood. They think I am a tool, but I will be the knife that cuts their bloodline. The ink bled into the page, final and absolute. When dawn came, I was still awake. The city stirred, unaware that its titan had already stepped into a trap. Richard Allen believed he was untouchable, but he had already signed the document that would shatter his empire, and I was the one who placed the pen in his hand. The courthouse buzzed like a hive before the storm. Reporters swarmed the marble steps, microphones raised like weapons, cameras flashing with hungry light. Everyone wanted the fall of the Allens. Everyone wanted blood. I walked through the crowd, my head high, each step steady. They didn't know me yet, but soon they would. Inside, the room was packed. The hum of whispers rose, then fell as Richard entered, Catherine on his arm, Elise and Thomas trailing behind. They wore masks of composure, but their eyes betrayed the fracture lines. Pride forced them to walk tall. Fear hollowed their gaze. The judge's gavel struck. Silence rippled outward. The trial began. The prosecutor rose, calm, deliberate. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we bring before you undeniable evidence of fraud, exploitation, and deceit perpetrated by the Allen family through their empire, Allen Group. The first exhibit lit the screen, an internal email, Richard's words, stark against white. Adjust the Foundation's books. Move the excess into the private account. Keep the numbers clean for the press. The room gasped. Reporters lunged forward, pens scratching, cameras flashing. Richard's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection! This is taken out of context. The judge cut him off, voice sharp. Overruled. The document is clear. I watched Richard's jaw tighten, his lips pressed into a hard line. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. His empire cracked in his own handwriting. Then came the second blade. The speakers crackled. Catherine's voice filled the courtroom, rich with false sweetness. Yes, of course we adopted her for the benefits. It legitimized the funds. Richard always said it was strategic, and she was useful. The words dripped into the silence like poison. Gasps echoed. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Catherine's hands flew to her pearls, clutching them as if they could strangle the truth. That was private, out of context, she stammered. But the microphones carried every syllable, her excuses swallowed by the weight of her own confession. Reporters shouted over each other. Mrs. Allen, did you adopt her only for financial gain? Was it all a lie? Her face paled. Her lips trembled. The charm she had worn for decades shattered in seconds. And then, the killing stroke. The projector flickered. A grainy video filled the wall. Elise and Thomas in Richard's office, their voices raised, fury boiling over. You stole from the accounts! Elise shrieked, her finger stabbing the air. Don't deny it! You're the thief! Thomas spat back, veins bulging at his neck. He slammed a folder down. I've seen your hidden transfers. Paris accounts, Elise. Did you think no one would notice? The jury leaned forward. The public strained to hear every word. The heirs of Allen Group, once untouchable, reduced to snarling children clawing at each other before the world. Elise's face crumpled. She sobbed into her hands. Thomas cursed, fists clenched, his eyes darting wildly. Their facade collapsed into rubble. 3 strikes. The room shifted, the mighty family exposed. The prosecutor's voice cut through the noise. The Allen Empire is not built on vision or leadership. It is built on lies. Lies that exploited charities, manipulated finances, and even used the adoption of a child as cover. The evidence speaks for itself. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions like bullets. Richard, will you step down? Catherine, do you regret adopting Mila only for profit? Elise, are you accusing your brother under oath? Thomas, do you deny siphoning funds? Their answers collided into chaos. Richard thundered, no comment. His face purple with rage. Catherine wept, mascara streaking her cheeks. Elise's voice cracked. I won't take the fall for him. Thomas slammed his hand against the table. She's lying. She's always been jealous. The judge's gavel pounded, but the room was a storm. And I sat in the front row, still, silent, watching. My lips curled into a smile, not wide, not cruel, just cold, final. For years they paraded me as their miracle child, their proof of generosity. For years they told me I was nothing but a tool. And now, under the eyes of the world, the mask was gone. They were stripped bare. Hypocrites, criminals, frauds. I leaned back, letting the storm rage. Flash after flash lit their faces like lightning. Their empire dissolved under the weight of truth. Richard's voice broke, shouting orders no one obeyed. Catherine clutched at him, whispering pleas drowned by reporters' questions. Elise and Thomas tore into each other, screaming blame across the table. I savored every second. Every headline would carry their shame. Every newsfeed would replay their fall. The Allens, once untouchable, now dragged into the dirt they had buried me in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Justice was unfolding without me lifting a finger. I was the quiet center of their storm, the shadow they forgot to fear, and as cameras captured their ruin, I thought, this is what it means to win. The gavel struck, sharp, final, and just like that, the empire of the Allens shattered. Richard's face drained of color as the judge's words echoed. Fraud, embezzlement, corruption, his own signature sealed his fate. Officers moved toward him. He tried to rise, tried to bark commands the way he always had, but the cuffs clicked around his wrists, steel against skin. The sound was louder than any applause. Catherine gasped as though the air itself had betrayed her. Her hands trembled as she clutched at pearls that no longer glowed. Her lips whispered prayers, or maybe excuses, but none of them mattered now. Her voice was no longer silk. It was dust. She sank into the chair as cameras flashed, the crowd leaning forward to capture the image of a woman who had built her life on lies. Elise was the first to scream. She lunged toward Thomas, shrieking accusations, spitting rage. "This is your fault! You ruined us!" Her mascara streaked down her face, jewels clattering as she slammed her fists against the table. Thomas shoved her back, his own voice hoarse. "Don't you dare blame me! You were always jealous, always waiting to tear me down!" Their words tangled, venomous, while microphones captured every syllable. The world watched two heirs devour each other in public, all their masks ripped away. And me? I sat in the front row, calm, silent, watching. The flashes of cameras lit the room in bursts. Reporters shouted questions, hungry for headlines. Officers moved swiftly, guiding Richard toward the exit, his hands bound, his shoulders no longer proud. Catherine sobbed into her hands, surrounded by whispers of pity and disdain. Elise and Thomas clawed at each other until security dragged them apart, their wealth stripped, their futures in ashes. I leaned back in my seat, my lips curved. Cold. Certain. This was not joy. It wasn't relief. It was something harder, sharper. Justice, carved out of stone and scars. The court adjourned. The reporters surged. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as if time itself bowed to this moment. The doors opened, and a wall of cameras and microphones flooded me with light. Flashes burst like fireworks. Voices called my name. "Mila! Mila Allen! How do you feel?" "Did you plan this from the start?" "Are you proud you destroyed the Allens?" I paused at the top of the courthouse steps. The sun hit my face, warm, blinding. For a heartbeat, I remembered the girl in the orphanage, staring through barred windows, believing she was invisible. Now the world was staring at me. I did not answer the reporters. Some questions do not deserve words. I simply walked forward, each step steady, each step breaking the chains they had forged around me. Inside, my voice rose, steady, certain. They adopted me for profit, but I became their final sentence. Blood doesn't define family. Truth does. The words echoed in my mind, as real as if I had spoken them aloud. The flashes grew brighter, but I no longer flinched. I walked through the storm of cameras, through the noise and chaos, toward the street where light spilled golden across the pavement. I did not look back. The Allens had fallen, their empire reduced to rubble, their legacy turned to ash. And me? I was free, no longer their pawn, no longer their ornament, no longer their shield. I carried nothing of theirs with me, not their name, not their blood, not their chains. Only the truth, only my own life, waiting beyond those courthouse doors. I stepped into the light, and for the first time, it belonged to me.